Since their debut on October 17, 1968 in Surrey, England, the name of the British band Led Zeppelin has been synonymous with excess.
Those guys were golden gods, and they knew it. They took advantage of it, obviously.
By the time they were big, they certainly had got it down to fine art.
Nobody pushed the music as far or pulled audiences in as close.
When they really got moving in some of those grooves that they would lay down, they could just reach out and unify all those thousands of people and lift them up, just like a pagan dance.
No other band generated the heat.
Of course it's sex, it's what sells. It doesn't matter whether you're selling it to a man or a woman. It's rock and roll, it's sex.
Or the beat.
The whole building was rocking, and there was 4 of them. It was, for me, fantastic. I was so gobsmacked.
No other band had their chemistry.
They conjured up a whole world beyond reality.
On stage or in the imagination.
Is Jimmy Page into Satanism? Nobody knows. Who cares even, really?
No other band experienced the triumphs or the tragedies. And no other band except the Beatles ever sold more records.
They really made recordings which today are selling in huge quantities to young people all over the world.
In their 12 years together, Led Zeppelin created several of rock music's most celebrated anthems. Dazed and Confused, Whole Lotta Love, Kashmir, and Stairway to Heaven were a major part of the soundtrack of the 1970s.
Of all the rock and roll bands, including the early great ones, Rolling Stones, Beatles, I think that Led Zeppelin has the strongest influence on young bands today of any group in the history of rock and roll.
Powered by their musical talent, their passion, and the heavy-hitting business tactics of manager Peter Grant, Led Zeppelin turned the music business into the Led Zeppelin industry.
One of the brilliant strategies about the whole Led Zeppelin era was that they maintained the myth by not doing the ordinary, by not doing TV interviews and press, but leaving their fans wanting more, along with changing of the whole industry from it being the promoter making money and paying the band, saying, no, we're the band, we are the success, we'll take the money and pay you a percentage.
There are a lot of things they've never done. They never put out a single, ever.
Zeppelin's refusal to put out the usual 3-minute singles forced the audience to buy an entire album if they liked a song. And to pay a different kind of attention to the music Zeppelin was making.
It was like God was coming to visit your town tonight.
With Grant and Page at the helm, the band soared to stratospheric heights.
And that was all part of the strategy, you know, to create the buzz.
The occupants of these limousines don't rule countries, don't make oil deals. They don't even make million-dollar movies. They are the Led Zeppelin, a rock group on tour. And the Zeppelin is very big.
Led Zeppelin broke every existing record for attendance, record sales, hero worship, and rock and roll decadence.
Led Zeppelin left pop culture with a bunch of broken windows and kicked down doors and changed sexual mores. And they gave a lot of young bands a lot of big ideas.
Ironically, the name Led Zeppelin was a joke made by Keith Moon or John Entwistle of the band The Who, at a time when they were considering forming a band with some of Zeppelin's members. It was a quip about the likelihood of such a band taking off. Led Zeppelin began as an offshoot of the Yardbirds, the famed British band that launched guitar legends Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. In 1966, Jimmy Page had taken over as lead guitarist, but the Yardbirds were already falling apart. When the Yardbirds finally imploded, manager Peter Grant offered Jimmy an already booked Scandinavian tour and the name The New Yardbirds, if he wanted it. Page was only too keen. He set about rounding up a new band.
Jimmy Page, we knew because he was the guitarist of choice for recording sessions as a studio musician. And John Paul Jones was the bass player of choice for recording sessions. So we thought, well, these are two great musicians. And the buzzword was out that there was going to be this great group.
Jimmy had invited singer Terry Reid to join, but Reid was unavailable. He suggested a young blues singer from the North Country named Robert Plant. Plant had been with a group called the Band of Joy and was now fronting an obscure band called Hobstweedle.
Robert Plant, he was a little bit more of an unknown quantity. He had a very unusual style, which was not so melodic at the time.
Plant nominated his friend and former bandmate John Bonham as drummer. Bonham was newly married and barely making ends meet. He hesitated to give up his first decently paying gig with another band.
John Bonham was a hit from the word go, Jesus, and he was stunning, you know, blimey.
From their first rehearsal, Page, Plant, Bonham, and Jones had a magical chemistry together. Page remembered the moment as scary. It was so powerful.
That band was an animal. It was like a wild animal live. It just didn't care about anything but just being up there and bringing it right then.
In October 1968, the new band recorded its first album under its own name. It took just 9 days and barely 30 hours of studio time.
The first time we heard them, I said, well, this band is going to be the band that will take over.
Within a month of their first live appearance, Led Zeppelin had signed with Atlantic Records.
Jerry Wester and I we wanted them right away. It was the best band, rock and roll band of its type that I'd ever heard.
By December 1968, the band was on their way to America for a debut that would literally rock their audiences and land like a Led Zeppelin with critics. They had ever played together. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant spent several days at Jimmy's houseboat alongside the River Thames, talking about music.
They musically fell in love with each other. And you can hear it in the music, can't you?
Both musicians shared a passion for American blues and classic rock and rollers like Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis. But they were amazed to find that they also shared a love of folk-based acoustic artists like Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, and Bert Jansch.
Robert and Jimmy had the English folk background also coming in. There was a softer side.
While Plant and Page borrowed from their musical heroes and at times performed other artists' songs, Led Zeppelin's music was purely their own creation.
They really were not copying them. I think of them as having swallowed the pill. Once they swallowed the pill, they could just sit down and play naturally and improvise as though it were their own music.
One of the band's trademarks was a skill for improvisation that could take the song and the band into uncharted territory.
They would take all these inroads and outroads through sections of a song and sort of come out together at the same time.
It's impossible for an observer to actually understand how they achieved it.
Led Zeppelin's audiences were entranced with their versatility.
They would just weave this intensely slow motion effect, and then they'd rock out and everybody like, ah! And then they'd sit down and play acoustic with mandolins and stuff like that. They were defying gravity, really. It's magic. Yeah.
But for all of their diversity, nothing left a deeper imprint than the road-weary, big-hearted American blues.
They had this label that said heavy rock, or heavy metal as it was then. And, I thought, well, I'll go and have a taste of this and see what it's like. and immediately realized that it's completely based in the blues.
The exotic sounds and rhythms that flavored Zeppelin's music took audiences beyond the scope of their own lives, often beyond their own consciousness.
I think anyone who ever went to a Led Zeppelin concert is aware that it was a group trance that occurred there.
For some, the first taste of Zeppelin was actually overwhelming.
They started doing the Lemon Song, and all around us, we saw girls and women just going into this frenzy, and our eyes got kind of big, and we were like, what's that lemon thing all about? You know, it kind of freaked us out, and we ended up leaving.
Zeppelin's music wasn't the only thing affecting their audience's consciousness, especially in the United States.
And it was the whole thing coming out of the 60s into the early 70s, you know, it was free love, man. Let's get high. Go and see Led Zeppelin. Great.
The early days were mind-blowing for the band as well. Plant and Bonham were barely 20 and fresh from small towns in the Midlands. Suddenly, there were no limits. The Continental Hyatt House Hotel in Los Angeles, where Zeppelin set up U.S. headquarters, became known as the Riot House. The band invited their hosts to enjoy themselves as well.
There'd been some slight damage to one of the rooms, you know, accidental damage. And Peter Grant said to the manager of the hotel, "Oh, I bet you hate it when we come here." And he said, "Well, no, actually, Mr. Grant, we have much more trouble when the Mormon convention comes to town." And Peter Grant just couldn't stop laughing. He said, "Here's $1,000, have a room on us." He made him go up to a room and made the manager throw the TV out the window. And the manager of the hotel was going, "I've always wanted to do this."
And the fun wasn't just confined to hotel rooms.
There was a friend of the band called B.P. Fallon. We rounded up a couple of sheep, and while he was asleep in bed, we ushered them into his room and lit a flare and threw it in there, and he woke up with his sheep freaking out around his bed. You know, schoolboy stuff. Fantastic fun.
With spin being a Led Zeppelin specialty, fans will never know how much was true. But of course, the bigger the rumors, the greater the publicity. Whatever took place on the road, all of the band members maintained that they were devoted family men, and all did have children at home. Of course, these wives and children almost never joined the tour.
Going home is like going to Sanctuary, and going on the road is like going to Sanctuary.
Sanctuary was essential. In 1971, a music festival in Milan became a riot when 12,000 fans locked horns with police. The band was driven off stage by flying bottles and tear gas. Eventually, Zeppelin's extreme lifestyle took an extreme toll. But from their dancing days in the early 70s till their crash landing in 1980, Zeppelin was unstoppable, especially in America.
The whole American culture with Woodstock and everything was that it was okay to go and let your hair down at a concert, you know. And that certainly happened at all Led Zeppelin's concerts. Hair was let way down.
Critics, however, were unimpressed.
When Led Zeppelin was actually performing and making records and so forth, the serious critics did not really like them.
After Led Zeppelin's first hour-long show in Denver, Colorado on December 26, 1968, Robert Plant's singing was described as having no special appeal. Bonham's drumming was uninventive and unclimactic. 3 days later, in Boston, the crowd demanded 7 encores. Still, the negative reviews continued. In 1969, Rolling Stone magazine judged Zeppelin's efforts self-indulgent and restricted. Not only did fans send protest letters, they bought concert tickets and records. In 1975, Led Zeppelin was the first band in history to have 6 albums on the record charts at once. It took this for the press in England to grudgingly acknowledge their achievement.
It's only afterward that people began to realize how important they were in the history of rock and roll.
Throughout their career, Led Zeppelin and their music floated miles above their critical reputation, never stopping to look back for guidance or judgment.
It was their music. They played it the way they chose to be. And if the audience reacted favorably, what more can you ask for?
Today, Zeppelin's legendary faith in themselves and their music seems more than justified. When their 5.5-hour-long career retrospective was released, Led Zeppelin hit #1 again, though they hadn't played together as a band in 23 years. James Patrick Page was born on January 9th, 1944. He grew up in an uninspired suburb near London's Heathrow Airport. Jimmy was an artistic only child with a delicate constitution. He spent a good deal of time alone because no other children lived on his road. For all his physical frailty, Jimmy Page grew up to compose several of rock music's hardest-hitting and most enduring anthems.
He's very effete in many ways, Jimmy. And his voice is also quite an effete voice. And yet from this persona comes this incredibly this heavy rock music. I mean, deep down, big.
When Jimmy heard the Elvis Presley song, Baby Let's Play House, he said to himself, that's it, I'm off. At 12, he started teaching himself to play guitar. He began by copying American rock and roll records, then branched out to blues guitarists like Elmore James and B.B. King. What really clinched Page's devotion to rock and roll was how forbidden it was. He claims that his teachers took away his guitar until 4 o'clock to keep him focused on his studies. In 1959, Page joined his first band. After a few debilitating months on the road, he got very ill and decided to pursue a career in fine art instead. But even as an art student, he continued playing guitar. While at art school, a classmate introduced Page to her brother, a young guitarist named Jeff Beck. Few people at the time had electric guitars. Even fewer were as obsessed as these two. Page and Beck inspired and infuriated each other for years to come. A great fan of their playing, Jimmy's mother brought them tea while they jammed in her front room on weekends.
Jimmy's mother was a big figure in his life. He didn't get on too well with his father, I remember, but he adored his mother, and they were very close.
In 1963, 19-year-old Jimmy was playing during intermission at a popular London blues club. Someone asked if he'd like to play on a record, and a historic career was launched. Page quickly became the most wanted session guitarist on the lively English recording scene. All day long, he switched effortlessly between pop, folk, film scores, and country music. He recorded with hundreds of artists, from Donovan to the Kinks, and from the Rolling Stones to Burt Bacharach. Page even played on The Who's debut single, I Can't Explain.
He was a true professional, and talented, of course, so he was like clockwork, Jimmy.
Though Jimmy excelled at studio work, for a musician of his skill and creativity, it soon got old.
Jimmy had been stuck in poky little studios. He now wanted a bit of live music, getting out there on the road with a band.
In 1966, Jimmy joined his friend Jeff Beck at a Yardbirds concert. When one of the Yardbirds quit after the show, Page jumped in. He was so eager to join the band that he agreed to play bass, though he had never picked one up before.
He was that desperate to get into the band, you know. He wanted to play bass. He was happy to play bass.
He'd have played drums, probably, I think, if he got him on the road.
Led Zeppelin was Jimmy's chance to put into play all the creative energy he had been storing up. Robert Plant was the ideal counterpart.
Robert really was continuously the extrovert, and Jimmy was often the introvert. So as a team, it was fascinating and was pleasing to the eye and the ear, you know.
Supported by the bionic John Bonham on drums, Page was free to go wherever the music took him.
They had a real playful touch with each other as players, and they were always, I think, kind of in some kind of race to do the unexpected, you know.
Fans were transported by Jimmy's total abandonment and by the show he put on as he played.
I always find myself channeling Jimmy Page on stage because his sort of the soulful nature of his really intense energy on stage as a player.
To this day, the name Jimmy Page is sacred to young guitar players who have only seen his performances on video and DVDs.
You go into any music store and kids today are still trying to play Stairway to Heaven to try out the new guitar, you know. Well, that's got to say a lot, hasn't it, you know? This is the riff that I want to be able to play, and I'm only 12.
Page's years in the studios gave him a major advantage as a producer and performer. Dramatic effects like bowing his guitar or playing a theremin on stage earned Page a reputation as a wizard. Offstage activities earned him a reputation as well. Page was reputed to be involved with the study of the occult and a devotee of the English black magic enthusiast, hedonist, and heroin addict Aleister Crowley. He purchased a home Crowley had lived in and collected memorabilia connected with him. Jimmy's fascination with Crowley led him to inscribe Crowley's motto, "Do what thou wilt," on the masters of Led Zeppelin III. Ultimately, superstitious fans would try to ascribe many of the tragedies that beset Led Zeppelin in later years to Jimmy's trafficking with the devil. But other factors in Jimmy Page's and the band members' lives would prove to be a more immediate threat. For the next 7 years, Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin would be tested by the pressures of their own fame and notoriety, competition from several new genres of popular music, and most difficult of all to overcome, the unparalleled success of Zeppelin's early endeavors. With Jimmy Page's guitar playing as its heart and Robert Plant's voice as its soul, the Zeppelin still had far to fly. Robert Plant's unmistakable voice graced every one of 10 Led Zeppelin albums for 12 years. No backup singers, only one special guest star on one song.
There's no other singer who sounds anything like Robert Plant. Robert Plant has a totally different approach and a different understanding.
Plant's otherworldly wail combines all the passion, power, and yearning of the blues players he idolized as a boy with the swagger of Elvis, the earnest emotion of his folk heroes, and the traditional Eastern music he absorbed in extensive travels.
He knows just about every song by every obscure artist ever made.
His lyrics range from mock historic Celtic epics to ethereal folk poetry, tributes to Tolkien, and straight-up howls of desire.
They are a metal band, but they're so much more because they had this young man, Robert Plant, who was also a poet, had poetry in his soul, dug other people's poetry, and said, my band's gonna be multidimensional too.
Robert Anthony Plant was born on August 20th, 1948. He grew up in a rural village near Birmingham and close to the border of Wales. At 13, he says, he discovered girls and grew his hair, and his life as a rock idol began to take shape.
He was the first one to have the glorious mane of medieval blonde hair that every woman wanted.
Robert was destined, according to his parents' plans, for a successful career as an accountant. But before his training began, Robert discovered the blues. As teenagers, Kevin Gammon and Robert played together with John Bonham in the Band of Joy. Robert planned to earn a degree from Kidderminster College until he performed the Lemon Song on campus.
We were doing local gigs in this area, one which was the famous Kidderminster College gig where the principal pulled the plug out when we performed the Lemon Song, which was raw, wild, crazy, and we were thrown out of the college.
At 16, Robert left home to pursue his passion. He planned to give himself till 20 to succeed. After a few years with the Band of Joy that included being fired by their manager for not having much of a voice, Robert moved on. When Jimmy Page came to hear him, Robert was singing with a band called Hobstweedle. Barely earning a living, Plant moved in with his girlfriend's large Anglo-Indian family. He married Maureen in 1968, and they had 2 children, a daughter, Carmen Jane, and a son, Carrick, named for a Celtic general. Despite his cozy home life, Robert cultivated a larger-than-life rock god image. His form-fitting jeans and flirty shirts were about as overt as male sexuality ever dared to go in the 1970s.
He was one hot guy. I mean, why do you think it all worked so well?
On stage, he was pure energy and physicality in motion. His presence and his way of moving mesmerized men and women alike.
He showed a kind of real fiery comfort with his sexuality that set a lot of male singers free.
Like Page's guitar, Plant's voice is a versatile instrument with a range of colors, shadows, delicacy, and unnerving intensity.
Because of the sheer power and the influence of all the great blues singers, they came up to the microphone, they could split your head in two. It had that real sort of conviction and power.
In August 1975, a shattering moment threatened the future of both Robert and Led Zeppelin. He and his family were vacationing in Greece when Maureen Plant lost control of their car. Maureen fractured her skull, and Plant sustained numerous injuries, most significantly, a badly smashed ankle that kept him off stage for nearly 2 years. Robert recovered physically, but gained a life-altering awareness of the fragility of human life. Yet even as he eased warily back into performing, tragedy waited around the corner. In 1977, on the band's first tour to America since his accident, Robert received a phone call from Maureen. 5-year-old Carrick had succumbed to a violent respiratory infection.
Dear Robert experienced the thing that we all fear the most, you know. His son died while we were away.
Robert was immobilized. His old mate John Bonham showed up to hold Plant and grieve with him. Robert questioned his entire existence and purpose in life. Whether Led Zeppelin continued or not seemed of little consequence.
I think that his passion for music took a huge dent, and eventually he's rekindled it, you know. But I think that it probably changed his priorities in life quite a lot.
In early 1979, Plant agreed to return to the stage. Led Zeppelin delivered a historic series of concerts in England that changed their status in the British press once and for all. Robert and Maureen, meanwhile, had gratefully welcomed the birth of a second son, Logan. Though Robert would never recover from the loss of Carrick, a tolerable existence had begun to seem possible. Peter Grant planned a massive tour of the U.S. for the fall of 1980, but the Zeppelin was about to lose altitude unexpectedly. Baldwin was born on January 3, 1946, in Sidcup, England. His father, Joe, was a successful pianist and arranger. His mother also worked in the music business, so the family often toured and performed together. John received an extensive musical education at a prestigious boarding school. By age 14, he was choirmaster and organist at his local church. His family encouraged him to pursue music. John's father urged him to take up the saxophone, but John convinced him that he could earn a living playing the bass.
He's such a musical talent, such a multi-instrumental talent. It enabled that band to do what they did live.
Baldwin changed his name to John Paul Jones at the suggestion of his friend, the manager of the Rolling Stones, who had seen the more intriguing name on a French movie poster. Within the band, he was known as Jonesy. By 16, Jones was playing bass for a popular band. He soon moved on to a prolific career as a session musician in the same league with Jimmy Page. He played on or arranged innumerable recordings for artists like Donovan, Shirley Bassey, the Rolling Stones, Rod Stewart, and Cat Stevens. In fact, he and Page met at a session for Donovan's Hurdy-Gurdy Man. But for Jones as well as Page, life in the studio, while profitable, was a dead end. When Jones' wife, Mo, suggested that he call and find out what Jimmy Page was up to, she was hoping to help him find a way out of a tedious routine. Jones admired Jimmy. He dutifully made the phone call. Life was never dull again. Many of Zeppelin's best-known compositions originated with Jones. On others, he could be relied on to bring in the funk or weave a gossamer thread.
No one really understands the whole contribution that John Paul Jones made. I mean, if you really listen to Stairway to Heaven and listen to the keyboards or Rain Song, you know, that's some big stuff John Paul Jones is doing.
While Jones was responsible for his share of mischief on the road, he became known, if only in comparison, as the quiet one.
He always looks like he's the quiet one, and I've certainly heard him being very, very loud.
As time went on, Jones often stayed at a separate hotel on tour. He visited friends and explored each new city.
I think they all had fun together, and I think when it was downtime, they would have their own separate things to do.
Always a pro, he never failed to show up on time and ready to play. Between commitments, Jones maintained a quiet country life in Devon with his wife and 3 daughters. Like Plant, he recharged and enjoyed his family. One of Jones' proudest claims was that the rhythm section he created with drummer John Bonham made the girls in the Zeppelin's audience get up and dance. How could they resist?
John Bonham.
John Bonham. Speaking of the hammer of the gods, we come to John Bonham.
John Henry Bonham was born to play the drums.
John Bonham, Bonzo, was one of the most aggressive, hard-hitting, lead-footed drummers that ever existed.
Born on May 31st, 1948, in Redditch, Worcestershire, he was the son of a carpenter. At 5, his father presented him with his first set of drums, his mother's pots and pans, and a tin of bath salts strung together. By age 10, he received an actual snare drum. At age 17, while working construction with his father and playing drums on the side, he married his high school sweetheart. Money was scarce. He promised Pat that he would give up drumming and do something profitable. Until he met Robert Plant. Bonham played in both of Plant's bands, but had recently snagged a decently paying gig when Jimmy Page tried to recruit him for his new band. Even though his friend Robert had already signed on, Bonzo hesitated. But Robert and Jimmy didn't let up. Bonzo became the engine that drove Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin higher, tighter, and harder than any other rock band.
During the live performance, Jimmy would spend most of the time right in front of the kick drum, in his back like this. And that was the groove.
He could play with his hands. He could play with 4 drumsticks in each hand. He could play all night. What Bonzo couldn't do was downshift. A loving, gentle family man at home, Bonham became a wild man on the road. His alcohol and drug intake was as huge as his drumming. After a show in Belfast, Ireland, a drunken Bonzo and a friend threatened the staff in a restaurant with a knife for being closed when they were hungry. The band's road manager, Richard Cole, arrived in time to knock him out. This was not unusual behavior for Bonzo or for Richard Cole. On Bonzo's 25th birthday, held in a Los Angeles hotel, George Harrison dumped the top tier of Bonham's birthday cake on his head. Bonzo picked up Harrison and Patty Boyd and deposited them in the pool. Harrison said it was the best party he'd been to in ages.
Just fun, you know. Boys being boys.
But the partying couldn't last forever. On September 25th, 1980, the band met at Jimmy Page's mansion to rehearse for their first American tour after Carrick's death. Bonzo loosened up with a few drinks and played splendidly. After passing out on a sofa, he was helped to a bedroom, where during the night he regurgitated in his sleep and asphyxiated. He was discovered next morning by Benji Lefavre.
I said to Jimmy and Robert, don't go up there, you don't need to see this, but that's just fact, you know. He died. It was tragic. It hit us all really hard, you know, it's like losing a sibling.
Bonzo was the motor. There was no going forward without him. On December 4th, 1980, Led Zeppelin decided unanimously to disband. The band issued a statement that said, "The loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." In many ways, Jimmy Page did prove to be a wizard. His talent, formidable will, and business sense not only created the most successful hard rock band of the time, it transformed a generation and an industry.
You don't, create a band and take it to the top of the pinnacle and produce all those great albums without a certain cohesiveness of willpower. Let's put it that way.
Page's wizardry transformed the way music was performed and recorded.
Jimmy Page is an amazing producer. He makes things sound really present. It's right in your face, it's right in your ears, in your head.
Led Zeppelin defined the era of the long-playing album. While their music was never aimed at the pop charts, Zeppelin ruled the FM airwaves and concert arenas. They are, by most measures, the most commercially successful rock band ever. Jimmy Page embraced every aspect of the business as an opportunity for what we now call branding. When the press focused too heavily on gossip, he turned their attention back to the music and the myth with a typical flourish. For Zeppelin's fourth album, Page had each band member choose a symbol to represent himself on the cover, but pointedly omitted any other information. Jimmy, of course, refused to reveal the meaning of his own symbol. Fans were literally enchanted.
Perpetuating the myth. There comes that phrase again. It is a brilliant strategy, and it works to this day, you know.
From their first note, Zeppelin was a stunning example of musical alchemy. Each member was an irreplaceable ingredient in their musical chemistry. Minus one of its four essential elements, there would be no more miracles.
The most important thing was the music, and the music could not continue without John, apparently.
After Bonham's death, each member of the band mourned in his own way. Jimmy Page put down his guitar for 2 years and gave full rein to his reclusive side. He mixed the band's farewell album and wrote the soundtrack to a film. Page didn't perform again until 1983, when he joined several of rock's superstars at a benefit concert. Now 60, Page's wife Jimena and 3 young children are his priority. He devotes time and energy to a charity run by Jimena that cares for homeless children in Brazil. Page has since toured and recorded with other vocalists, but he has never replaced the musical magic he shared with Robert Plant. He and Robert played together on a 1994 MTV Unleaded special and toured twice as Page Plant in 1995 and 1998. They have no plans to revive Led Zeppelin. In August 2004, Jimmy Page was the first musician invited to leave his handprints in the new British Rock and Roll Walk of Fame. Robert Plant and Kevin Gammond founded a music education program and a record label at the same Kidderminster College that booted him for his famous rendition of the Lemon Song. And yes, Robert occasionally drops by to lend an ear or an opinion. Now divorced, he still lives in the Black Country near Wales, where he is a rabid supporter of the Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club. He continues to explore and collect music from around the world. The quiet one, John Paul Jones, has gone on to a varied career as a solo artist, producer, and composer. Jones has toured and recorded with opera singer Diamanda Gallas and worked with REM, Brian Eno, Paul McCartney, and to their great delight, with Heart. He has not worked again with Page or Plant. Peter Grant's larger-than-life journey ended in 1995 when he died of a heart attack. After Zeppelin, he never managed another band. But during his glory days, Grant left an indelible mark on rock and roll history. As John Paul Jones put it, there were absolutely no limits for Zeppelin. The only rule was that the music always came first. Led Zeppelin would do anything to ensure that.
I think having that determination and also being able to have the combination of Jim, John Paul Jones, it was the right box of fireworks.
From early on, when the band tired of life in the fast lane, they would retreat to a rustic cottage in Wales where Robert Plant had vacationed as a boy. Walking in the countryside, sitting around a fire at night, inspired softer, more intimate songs that offered a glimpse at another side of the band's artistic soul. As it turns out, their spirit, like their music, was without limits. Another creative haven was a rented manor house outside of London.
There was a big marble entrance hall with an oak staircase that went up 2 floors all around it, and that was where the drums were, and, you know, they just sounded enormous. There was a big living room next door, which was where John Paul and Jimmy were, in front of a log fire playing. Yeah, it was fun.
Several landmark recordings took place here. Using the entire house to record in gave Page a fresh canvas to work on. Most importantly, Headley Grange was a hideaway where the music could unfold in its own time.
Mandolins, guitars, pianos, mellotrons, whatever it may be, would be there at their disposal. And some days, people wouldn't get out of bed. And some days, people wouldn't go to bed. There's no formula that I can give you as to how they wrote songs. They just did.
Led Zeppelin was always on a quest. You know, it seemed like they were on a quest to merge a lot of different realities into their music.
When something is that good and that honest and that soul qualified, it does not go bad. It does not degenerate, you know.
It's authentic.
Yeah, it's authentic.
The most requested rock song of all time was completed at Headley Grange. Robert Plant had been reading a book of Celtic history. Jimmy played him bits of the song on cassette. As he sat by the fire one night, the first lines came into Robert's head.
There's a lady who's sure,
and the rest is history.
And she's by
The stairway to heaven is in your mind, babe.
Led Zeppelin guarded the secrets to their musical alchemy. But maybe it was nothing that could be put into words. You simply had to be there.
to heaven.